morning, everyone, and welcome to our, I have to even check, this is our 80th episode. I mean, it's amazing. We started this about a year and a half ago in the midst of the pandemic, and we've had so many wonderful guests, of course, including Susan Christoffersen today, Dean of Rotman Commerce. Good morning, Dean. Dean, I'm going to say that. I can say that.
Yeah, well, you can say Dean, or I'll say the female version is Deanne.
All right, Deanne.
No.
Listen, I'm 100% inclusive. I like that, Deanne.
No, that's okay. My inside joke.
Okay. We designed this program in the wake of the COVID pandemic as a way to find the truth. In each episode, we go on the ground with industry professionals in an unscripted, candid video format to better understand how the pandemic will affect the future of our economy, our life, and of course, our investments. By way of background, my name is Anthony Scilipoti. I'm the CEO and president of Veritas, which is an independent equity research firm based in Toronto, Canada. I'm proud to say we just celebrated now 21 years, 100% employee owned and operated and independent. During this series and with everything we do, we believe the truth comes from the facts and that better information leads to better investment decisions. I have to make a quick disclaimer. This broadcast is not to be taken as investment advice, and participants or employees of Veritas Investment Research may own securities discussed in this broadcast. While we love all our guests, and Susan in particular, this session may contain forward-looking statements, investments, opinions, and comments that we may or may not even agree with. Now, I like to borrow that from, if you watch The Tonight Show, that's what he used to do with his cue cards when he was done. Anyway. Quick comment about Professor Christoffersen. So just started now 6 months ago as Dean of Rotman. Now, but she comes and has spent a decade at Rotman. And she has a PhD from the Wharton School in Pennsylvania. I'm sure that's going to be interesting because you also got your master's degree from the University of British Columbia. So you've traveled around a little bit, and you've been at Queen's where you got your undergrad here in Ontario. And the number of noteworthy things you've done over the last decade while you've been a professor, a finance professor at U of T. You're also the William Downe BMO Chair in finance. But you spent, and I think one of the very important things you did is you helped with the revamp of the Commerce program. You launched a number of new graduate programs, Master of Financial Risk Management, Graduate Diploma in Professional Accounting, near and dear to my heart, of course, Master of Management Analytics, and the Master of Finance program. I think that that one is particular. I know a few professors that teach in that realm. So excellent background. And here you are stepping into Tiff Macklin's shoes, which I think is very interesting to start with. I remember in our first conversation that I found very interesting. So today we're going to talk, of course, we always like to hear the background of why our guests do what they do and what brought them to where they are. But we're going to go back a little bit, get a little bit of background into the work that you've done, the actual analysis and research that you've carried on over the last decade and plus. And then we'll talk about some specifics related to that I think will be very interesting to our guests, where we talk that won't just affect U of T, but it affects our overall university and post-secondary education here in Canada. And we've just had a huge, I think this is, as I like to put it, this is a huge test study that happened in real life, which is how we had to cope with the pandemic. And then, of course, we'll touch on the all-important issue of what happens with tuition and all that sort of thing. So let's start with a little bit about yourself. Tell us what brings you to the Dean. Did you think, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that you'd be sitting in these shoes as Dean?
Yeah, I don't even think I thought that a year ago, that this was, no, it's interesting how, I didn't wake up 20 years ago and say, I want to be the Dean of the Rotman School. It was a long path. For those that don't know me, I'm Canadian, sort of born in Newfoundland and raised in BC. So I think I'm a true coast to coast girl. Actually raised by a gold miner. My dad's a gold miner, real prospector. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what's going to happen to the price of gold. And I don't venture to say what that's going to be coming up, in terms of investment advice for your group. But, went into academics, and I think, I actually worked with the government. So it's funny, there was a point, where I think Tiff and I were both working in Ottawa at the same time. He was at the Bank of Canada, I was in the Ministry of Finance. But I looked, and I thought to myself, I love school. I love learning, and went back into my PhD, and then taught for several years at McGill. And the area that I was really intrigued with was, it was actually very close to what I think a lot of your viewers might be interested in asset management. So I spent, basically 20-year career looking at various ways in which asset management and investment decisions are important for us. And I'm really happy to sort of talk a little bit about kind of that research. It's there's some really interesting stuff. And I think one of the things that's really important, which is probably important for your viewers, that we found out is the importance of independent research. And, I can talk a little bit about that. But, how did I end up in this job? It's funny. I think sometimes when you're in a career, there's those moments. Tiff approached me, and I had worked in the MBA program at McGill, and he approached me in 2015 and said, "Would you like to be the vice dean?" And I struggled with it. I struggled with, do I really want to sort of take on this new role? And the beginning part of it, I think every day I would, be trying to do something new, working with people, and getting frustrated and sort of thinking, okay, that's it. I'm gonna quit the next morning. But getting up and getting excited again about what I was. And then 5 years goes by, you're in the position, and for sure, there's still the frustrations and everything. You look back and you say, wow, we accomplished a lot, and really, we accomplished a lot for the students that we're overseeing. And that was, for me, was probably one of the, was a really great feeling, just thinking that I had such an important impact, in terms of increasing, talking to students. And I think that's really what encouraged me to sort of think about doing this now. So I'm just gonna.
And you see, and you're working all the time. I love it.
I'm working.
Take a break.
Yeah, I think that someone coming for advice on what was gold.
I'm going to leave this point. But what was the aha moment that said, this is what I'm going to, because you said it was a long journey that got you here to be a dean, but was there that aha moment that said, you know what, today, yep, I'm going to take this on?
Yeah, this is all right. Sorry.
Okay.
Someone's calling me from, I think they found out that I was a gold miner's daughter, and they really wanted insights on what's going to happen.
We are going to get some gold advice from you. I don't think I'm going to let you off on that.
Yeah, the aha moment, I think, so basically last January, so, it was crazy, working through, honestly, having to deal with the changes in the environment in terms of moving from an largely in-person to online, basically over a weekend. I mean, it happened so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And this was when Tiff was still in the role. So if you can imagine March 2020, we just, and University of Toronto is a huge institution. We moved overnight 230 sections from being in person to online, basically over the weekend, March 13th, and basically everybody came in. And thanks, basically to a lot of our professors. So that's March 2020, and then you're sort of coping with, what do we do with final exams, and how long is this going to last, and all the various questions, and is this going to be in the fall, and we're recruiting students, and how are we going to adjust for visas for those students and bring them in and keep them safe? And the multiple, questions that came up about that. And then come March, or come May, we're in a faculty council meeting, and there we see Tiff, accepting his role as the new Bank of Canada governor. And while we were all so proud, that, you know, that he had taken that position. For those of us that were on the leadership team, it was, you know, it was just kind of your heart saying, it's like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And, you know, but we got together, we were very strong, and we continued to lead the crew. And, you know, Tiff basically left the following month. But, you know, I think it was then that I thought, you know what, this is an incredible institution, and to be able to lead it, and this is an opportunity. So I think it was at that point that I started to think, you know, do you want, you know, you've been working as kind of, you know, one of the 4 vice deans supporting, do you want to take on the role? And I think it gave me that opportunity to really think about it, and knowing the various challenges. But I think really what gave me that was just seeing how people came together in a very, very difficult time, came quickly together. It's a very rewarding experience as part of the leadership. And did we get it 100% right? I don't know, but
listen, if we judge it by the outcome, you have today, is your student enrollment lower than it was in 2019?
No, if anything, it's higher.
Thank you. So, you know, ultimately, if we just judge it based on outcomes, you come a long way. So we'll go back to the script now, because that's a wonderful, because it's interesting how, you know, for all our listeners, I love when our guests always say, no, I didn't expect to be here. It just kind of happened. And that's how careers evolve. You know, I always tell students when I meet them, it's like, don't worry about the job at the end. Like, just focus on progression, focus on improving yourself. Okay.
And so I just wanted to pick up on that. Love what you do. You know, I love what I do. I love, you know, when I think about the students that you're impacting, or, you know, I love interacting. I mean, I'm not loving that I'm doing this, having to do this remotely. I would much rather be interacting with the faculty and seeing people engaged. But, you know, did I sort of think I'm going to be a dean? No, but you know what? I love being a vice dean. And the fact that I got that experience, and sort of, you know, and it was something that I was enjoying. I think if I wasn't enjoying it, I probably wouldn't have continued on. So yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your research findings that you spent a 20-year career looking at. And you know, one of your key findings is to look at how brokerage commissions for advice affects money flows and the performance, and of course the importance of independent research. So why don't you bring that together for us in terms of what your findings are?
Yeah, no, so this was a paper that I wrote, I guess 2013, and it ended up being kind of a critical part. So the White House at the time, this was prior to Trump's administration, but was really keen to hear, you know, what was happening to retirement dollars, and how were those retirement dollars being allocated. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the vast majority of people are investing through asset managers, and the vast majority of those people are coming to, to mutual funds through some sort of brokerage channel. And what we were sort of, the curiosity that we had is, does it matter how the broker is paid, in terms of what advice they get and where they go? And you know, so many of your viewers may sort of know that the way in which mutual funds work is that there's often a embedded trailer fee that's paid as part of the management fee that the broker receives. So it seems to you as an investor that you're not having to pay them anything, but the broker is getting paid. They're getting paid by the mutual fund, you know, a percentage of the assets that they're bringing in. And, you know, because those fees are not immediately visible or easily visible to the consumer, to the investor, we sort of looked at cases. We were looking both at the trailer fee, but also at the load that investors were paying. And some companies were paying them a greater percentage of the load than others. So some you would get, say, 80% of the load, sometimes you'd get 60. And so that different compensation, we were sort of looking at how did that influence where the money went.
Okay. And
we, not surprisingly, found that, you know, bigger payout by the mutual fund would relate to higher flows into those mutual funds. And, there were several mutual funds where, and so, this is, so that's not a problem necessarily. I think the second part of the study really looked at, we found that payment to the broker affected the performance of the investors 12 months after the. So when we compared a broker, paid less versus paid more, the ones that were paid more incrementally had poor performance over the 12 months after investment. Wow. And this was, I think, a pretty, important result. It hadn't been shown before. We actually had to do a lot of digging through the Edgar filings down in the US. We don't have, the frustrating thing is we don't have a lot of data in Canada to do something like this in Canada. There was a study done by the Ontario Securities Commission. But, just that these fees and the ways in which the brokers were being paid really influenced both where the money went and also the performance of the investors. And there's a huge conversation right now around how should we pay brokers, and this idea of paying an upfront fee. We pay lawyers fees, we pay accountant fees, maybe we should pay our investment advisor a fee that we know what they're being paid. And because they do have the thing is I'm not saying they're not skilled. I think investment advisors are very skilled, and I think that we should be paying them for those skills. But when they're the way in which we're paying them now is not visible to consumers.
Now, I think, you're right. And our securities regulators here in Canada have made done a lot of work on this, and the rules have changed. So now, investors in mutual funds do know, they get to see the total cost that's being paid, both what's being paid to the portfolio manager and what's being paid to the investment advisor. That's all transparent. Next year, there's going to be more changes that are coming through where the trailers that are paid to mutual funds purchased on discount brokerage channels, that's going to be something that's going to be dealt with. So there's definitely, you were groundbreaking thinking about this in 2013 and where we've come. And so it's interesting that the findings, kind of intuitively, that's what you expect, and that's probably why they've done so much to make them transparent. And many companies are now sitting at 1% as a trailer. There's no, most of them are 1% or less, from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've seen huge changes, which I think are positive. Because I think what it undermines is that there's value. There are people that have, like your organization, people that have skills in being able to identify, stocks and how to justify that, and also, but mutual funds and investment advisors. But these kind of incentives undermine the credibility of it, and so we need to remove those kind of disincentives. That are not necessarily working in the best interest of the consumer. Great.
So let's now talk about your last 6 months you've spent. I remember when before you started, we had a mock interview, if you will, and you said, "Give me some time. I'm going to spend some time thinking and seeing what's happening at the university, and then I'll come up with some plans and some things to address." Why don't we start talking about some of those? I mean, one of the ones that comes to me right off the bat is the whole concept of diversity with student pathways, representation, welcoming. This is a huge issue. What are you noticing, and what's the university doing about it?
Yeah, so I mean, this is, one of the things coming into this position is, I mean, obviously you're thinking about how can I grow the school? How can I make it more excellent? But the incredible amount of social change that you've seen over the last 2 years is just remarkable, right? Mm-hmm. And this started, in 2 years ago, with the various different riots and everything. So it is front and center in everything that we're thinking about. And we've actually developed a 5-part plan, very much on how do we increase pathways. So, and this is pathways of students, coming to us, where they start to think of Rotman, if they're coming from racialized or marginalized groups, that they are actually thinking of Rotman as a place to come. And that means, conferences, doing outreach, going into high schools, thinking about those pathways for those students. Representation, having scholarships. And we're thinking about it not only at the student level, but also at our faculty level. So we've been looking at postdocs coming from, different racialized backgrounds, because a lot of times the issue is that your pathway isn't that strong. So we need to sort of encourage that to bring people in. But then, so that's trying to sort of bring people and attract people and increase the diversity within the classroom. But then when they're here, you want to make sure that you have a welcoming environment. And so that means training people, training our staff, training our students on, how to be a more inclusive. One of the biggest learning points I had was you cannot have diversity without inclusion. So if you do not create an inclusive environment, you're not going to be successful in creating a diverse environment. So, ground zero of doing the training, thinking, setting, strong sets of values. But then, then we also have to think we are an educator. And the hope is that as an educator, we are teaching people about the importance of diversity. So they bring that to the institutions that they're going to when they leave here. So it should be part of our curriculum. It's part of our research. Just this year, one of the things that was done, which I thought was just fantastic, was creating a list of cases with diverse protagonists, right? So that our curriculum can start, because inevitably, you go back to the same case, so you go back to the same, how do we make sure that we're gaining diversity within the curriculum that we're doing? So these are, all important, aspects of diversity that we're looking at. And this is, very much aligned with what we're doing generally at U of T. And just as a plug, you can see these things making a huge difference. So in our Rotman Commerce program, for instance, we increased the diversity of our international pool by 50% just the last year by offering scholarships to our international students.
So in other words, the source of said international students changed.
Yeah,
They weren't coming. I think there was a huge number coming from, was it India or rest of Asia, or?
Yeah, we have, it was a much more concentrated, but we've increased it now by 50%. And I think this is just part of this, real commitment to diversity. Again, going pathways, recruiting from diverse different backgrounds. So that's absolutely. And the, in our MBA program, this is the first year we had 10% of the students identifying as Black. And, we had 6 new scholarships for Black students. So we're making, headway. It's not perfect. We still don't have representation for, racialized groups within the faculty. So we have a slot that we're looking to hire for. But, these, so some initiatives we could get done quickly. Others are going to take longer, and increasing the culture, and improving, making it more welcoming. And I'm very proud to say that this is our all-time record of having 45% of the women in our MBA class. So we've been increasing, and again, this was very targeted. I would say 4 or 5 years ago, when Tiff was dean, we were probably in the mid-30s, and he really made a commitment, 40% in 4 years, and we're exceeding that, and we're going for 50%, right? In equal representation within the class. But these take concerted efforts, and I think we're trying to,
how do you
do our part.
Does it in any way compromise meritocracy in any way? So
no.
that you're like, and how do you make that happen?
I think increasing pathways, making people think, that these are, I think a lot of times people get discouraged because they don't see this as a place where they are welcome. Mm-hmm. And so, no, I mean, and the crazy thing is, you talk about meritocracy. Our commerce program, well over 50% of it is women. So, mm-hmm. Why, in our, they're coming in. And so why were we seeing, drop-offs? Well, maybe it wasn't as accommodating. Maybe people didn't see this as a pathway. So mm-hmm. I think it's just, helping. And this is why the hard work is making people sort of see this as a place where they are welcome and where they can succeed and where there's interesting jobs for them at the end.
And I love that. And I think one of the things that I know I myself am involved in as well is you do a number of alumni events where you bring those of us that have graduated and say, and have events for the students to see that, look, there's a pathway for you. And I've been on some very diverse, panels, both culturally, et cetera, and gender. And, you can hear about their different stories of how they got through the university experience, and here they are. And I think that's really key. It shows the end result,
Right.
that there's a possibility.
It enriches so much of what we do, right? The conversation is much better, much richer. And, it teaches us all. I think one of the things that we have as a university is teaching people how to debate and understand, even if people have different opinions. And I don't think there's ever a time more important than now for us to learn how to hear people from diverse backgrounds and hear different voices. We're seeing so much polarization. I think the more that we can teach that in the university, the better off we'll be.
Hats off. I think that's exactly right. Remember, in the old days, when universities started, they were just a place of discussion, of exchange of ideas. Differences of opinion were what it was all about. And I fear that some places I've seen that can be frowned upon. So it's good. Keep an open mind where you can learn different viewpoints. You're getting people from all over the world that have different backgrounds, different cultures. And I think that makes the whole experience that much more fruitful.
Yeah.
We talk about sustainability. I know it's a huge thing in our industry here, in the investment industry, talking about ESG, et cetera. There's sustainability accounting coming up. I know the International Accounting Standards Board's working on that. What are you guys doing to reflect on this issue?
Oh, this is huge, right? Again, I sort of see that pathway into into the real world with jobs. But no, this is an existential risk for all of us, climate change. And so sustainability for me is going to be a critical point of, what I think of as kind of three themes for the school. I think that business over the next 10 years or 20 years is going to take a much, much stronger role in building, healthy societies for us. They are going to take a much bigger social role. If you think about the investment community, even just the shifts that you're seeing in capital and where capital is being allocated in different industries is making a big difference, right? And a lot of the ways in which we're going to change incentives to align us, to be climate and to be net zero, is going to take financial markets to help us do that. So we need to be training people to understand what is this shift. I think we need it in many ways. The other thing that I think is absolutely critical for us and where Rotman, I think, really excels is in the area of innovation. Many of the issues that we're facing right now are ones where, innovation can help. We have a Rotman Commerce student who graduated 3 years ago. She's starting her own company. She raised money through our Creative Destruction Lab.
Great.
Incredible. She started, her headquarters are out, it's called Earthos, a fantastic company, disrupting the plastic market, where she is making renewable, alternatives to single-use plastics. And she just saw somebody has to do something, and she took it upon herself. She's raised $7.3 million, and our CDL has provided innovation. But it's that kind of innovation, it's that kind of thinking, and empowering these young people, because they are going to be making the important decisions for us going forward. So I feel an incredible responsibility leading this school, because we have a big role to play in sort of saying these are important issues. Diversity is an important issue. Sustainability is an important issue. Training, we're changing the curriculum, incorporating that, providing research. These are all important things that we can do, I think, to sort of help get us to that net zero.
So that kind of leads us to the next key thing, I think, and that's remote learning and the whole learning experience, right? I mentioned at the outset, this is a, you know, we did it, what should have been done in a petri dish, we did it in real life. So how do, like today, I know that some classes are partly remote, some are live. What's been the experience? And so forth?
Yeah, no, so I mean, yeah, we've been on a big learning curve. I still like have nightmares of that weekend when we found out that we were going to online. I mean, honestly, people didn't even know like Zoom. We have like, thank goodness U of T actually had a lot of the infrastructure there. Yes. It's just people had never used it, right? Teams, what's Teams? You know, whatever the method was. But you know, so we've gone through a huge learning experiment. And you know, so many people say, well, why do we actually need universities, or why shouldn't we just be doing this online? I think one thing that it really drove home for me was the importance that we play in helping people. So while I think there's lots of ways we can leverage the online learning experience for the benefit. So there's a lot of stuff that we can teach in an online and then bring into a classroom where students get to apply it. And now people are more comfortable with using, you know, doing videos asynchronously and then bringing them into the classroom. But I feel very strongly that we have an important role in terms of, especially like you think about undergraduates, so much of their network and is built around, you know, coming together in a place. So, I mean, I am actually in the process. There's 2 buildings that are on the horizon that we'll be looking at. One is for some of our research centers in executive education. And the other, which I'm really proud of, is going to be for our Rotman Commerce program. And this has been a long time coming in creating appropriate space, but because I think these students craved coming back. They just wanted to come back. They wanted to see each other. And there is something missing from a research perspective of not being able to bump into each other. You just don't bump into each other on Zoom the same way you bump into people at the coffee shop, you know, when you're getting your coffee in the morning or whatever. So, or the late nights that students have hanging out, you know, at labs.
Or at other venues. But I went to U of T, so I have some fond memories. But what about is when you look forward to, let's say, 2022 year, is it an option? So I'm going to tick the box. I want to be remote. Tick the box. I'm going to be live. Is that?
So Rotman actually invested heavily in all of the technology in the school, so we can actually deliver hybrid. And actually, we're doing an experiment now with our working professional programs, where they, with our Master of Finance program in particular, where they can be in person or they can come in online. And our working professionals are kind of, they're working, I think they're going to enjoy the ability to have kind of this hybrid learning. For our other classes, we've told them that it's in person. It's hard to live in a limbo land, and so we've said you're in person. Now, of course, we don't want people coming if they're not feeling well. And so, you know, we are providing abilities for students to still learn online, but the expectation is they're coming in, they have masks on, we have a vaccine mandate. All of the classrooms have been refitted so that, you know, the air circulation is now, you know, very, you know, huge. There's lots of cleaning and stuff. So we feel pretty secure and safe in having people back in person, and we want to encourage that.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about philanthropy. We see news feeds, presentations that happen, you know, the building, like Rotman itself, of course, right? It's named Rotman for a reason. And, you know, so how does that come about? And how do you get it? How do you endow a chair? That's another thing that we hear about, like yourself, of course, the BMO chair. So maybe you could explain how that works.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, the university is actually just about to start a 10-year campaign, fundraising campaign. And that is actually going to be on December 13th. They're going to do the big launch for the university, and we're going to be a big component of that. So we're going to have some pretty big philanthropic. So if anybody, certainly I'm going to be looking for people, if anybody's interested in naming buildings, you can call me.
Right on.
But, I think what we try to do is align it with like donors if they're interested in, and want to align with the vision of the school. So, if you're interested in investing in the research productivity or seeing certain types of research being done, so a sustainability chair, a diversity chair, these are ways in which you can do that. I mean, certainly, what we try to do is endow it, so it's money that is invested, and then there's a stream of payments that are used to help fund that professor. And certainly, our professor salaries are very competitive, and it's a very competitive environment. So for us to really, go head to head with our competitors down in the US, we need that help. We need the assistance, because the money that comes off there helps to pay some very, very high salaries for talented professors.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk on that note. Let's talk about tuition. And I know there's been numerous studies that have been done, and a recent study looked at the colleges in Ontario. And I'll let you explain what's happened in the university setting, but I'll just mention the college one because I think it's an interesting backdrop. So generally, the foreign cost for tuition is about 4 times greater than the domestic tuition. Mm-hmm. And the Auditor General just did a study that says that the average, on average, 68% of Ontario colleges' revenue comes from the international students, anywhere between 80%, upwards of 80% in some cases. But however, they only make up 30% of the enrollment. So if but for the international students, these colleges would have a heck of a time even surviving. And I know I'd like to hear your perspective of what's happening on the university side, but we saw obviously Laurentian University unfortunately go bankrupt, which was a huge shock. To really the understanding in our industry dramatically looking at this. I know I talked to numerous clients about what's going on with our education system. How is it possible that a university could go bankrupt? And so maybe you could talk about what's happening at the university level.
Yeah, no, it is a struggle for us, in terms of, there's different incentives at play here. Yeah. We're currently under a tuition freeze for domestic students. Mm-hmm. And so that is really, and we're also, frozen in terms of the number of students that we can bring into the university in general. So it creates challenges for us, but we have actually, over the last couple of years, we've been slowing down tuition growth for international. And in fact, we've been putting more and more set-asides for our international students because we want to diversify the pool. But again, that is creating more financial stress for us, right? We're tuition, so we're sort of looking for alternative ways. We've really but I can imagine if this continues, it's going to be more and more difficult for us. I sort of felt we're currently at a situation where we have quite a few international students here at U of T. So we've not really made a big change. We've been, that pool has obviously grown, but I don't think we've changed that percentage of international and domestic for a long time. And so our inability to really, for the freeze in domestic tuition, though, is obviously, difficult for the university and for us to kind of cope with in terms of, so we've had to look for other mechanisms to, find added resources. We've been in a better position than, Laurentian, which was a really unfortunate, it's very sad because they were servicing many, many wonderful communities. They had some great programs there. And, we don't want to see that happen again. And so, we've been managing, but certainly it's certainly been a tough environment for us in terms of managing, both trying to manage our, budgetary situation, but also, with the eye that we still want to invest in that excellence. We still, and so, what I would say, going back to your earlier point, philanthropic help is probably needed more so now than it ever has been, because the universities, for us to, to invest in new spaces or new programs, it's increasingly, becomes difficult because you just don't have that ability to maneuver as much as you had in the past.
Right on. So is it the same sort of numbers that you would have at your university in terms of, so international students would be what percentage of the total body? You said it stayed about constant.
Yeah. So we're probably, our commerce program is probably about 40% international, 38%, I think, and it's been that way for quite some time. It may, it might have fluctuated. It was maybe, in the low 30s. It's probably 38% now, I think. Yep. And it's always hard, you're trying to sort of hit targets in terms of the numbers of students that you're going to bring in. Our MBA program is a higher portion of international students there, and we're probably about 50-50 in our other graduate programs. But that, I think in those programs, it's, maybe reflecting the, the pool, we have a bigger, Canada's a small country for those graduate programs. So I don't think it's really so much, we're there, it's really about trying to find the best candidates as opposed to, and just the pool of Canadian candidates versus the international ones is just smaller. But also we're very focused on making sure that we have a diverse international pool. But then, that means huge set asides that we're putting aside, and this is again, coming back to philanthropy. With tuitions being very high and, difficult, and if you want to achieve diversity, you need to provide, financial aid and scholarships for students. And so, we have, $10-12 million that are set aside, for scholarships and, to try to attract the best and the brightest from around the world. But again, it would be helpful for us, if that could be funded through scholarships that are, funded through donors.
Sure.
Right. And not having to bring that out of our operating.
You said that the number of students is limited. So is it set each year? Is it the government that says you can only bring in X number of students into the university? Is that how it works? So there's certainly in the domestic, in terms of there is funding, the government does provide us with grant funding, and so that money is provided. And there's they'll sort of regulate the amount of students that you can bring in, with those grant monies. On the domestic side, but on the yes. on the foreign side, it's not you could bring in more students, yeah. if you can house them, etc. Yeah, exactly. So there's no restrictions on the international students coming in, and so that that's where I think some the different incentives that play. But because we are already such an international, we didn't really make a big move to sort of, we already had quite a large number of international students in our programs. And so we didn't really make a big move. So it was just, we're just now more restricted in, the various ways in which we can, alter the tuition within our framework, which has meant that we've had to sort of look for other ways in which we can support our students and still, and still try to invest in the, excellence. I mean, the professors that we have here are world-class, absolute world-class, but that means I'm competing with US salaries, with US, and that becomes difficult when, you have other constraints put on you. For sure. Lots of balls to juggle, lots of change in the air, yeah. and trends that we need to address. If anyone has any questions, please, by all means, hover over the Q&A button there, and we'd be happy to take your questions. I'm going to just do something quickly here. If you can, I'm just going to launch our poll. and then everyone can tell us what a great job that you've done. And at the same time, is there any parting comments you'd like to make to
Well,
our
if there's,
today?
yeah, I just, if there's people out there who would really be, who are interested or intrigued, I encourage you to sort of reach out, check us out online, Rotman. It's a wonderful place. I think there's so many, we're really trying to be that lifelong learning place where people can come, and that there's something for everyone. If you're an undergraduate looking to come and get a business degree, somebody that's just finished and looking to do a little bump up, maybe a more specialty area. I think our Masters of Management Analytics program has just been incredibly popular, both with employers and students. We had, I think, over, so I would really encourage students to look, and people that maybe haven't gone back to our web pages. I mean, the incredible research activity that's going on, and check out our, Creative Destruction Lab, or our Financial Innovation Hub that's looking at machine learning applications in finance. There's a lot of cool stuff that's going on in the school.
Very good. Well, keep up the good work. We're going to check in with you probably next year and see how things are progressing as you roll out your new strategies.
I would love that. I would love that. Absolutely.
Thanks, Susan. Take care, everyone. Stay strong.